Good evening and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Committee of the Whole meeting for December 9th, 2024. We have a packed crowd, lots of good people out in our audience this evening, and we're going to go ahead and get started. The first item on our agenda is audience communications. Item 1, I do not see any blue slips. I did want to say, if you are following along at home, welcome to our home viewers, and you need a copy of the agenda, please go ahead and go on to the www.livoniapublicschools.org, hover over the board tab, go down to meetings, and then you'll find our schedule for this evening. If you're here tonight, the schedules are out on the door to the left of us. All right, we're going to go on to item 2, Committee of the Whole. And I'm the chair, so we're going to get moving with item A. We've got a couple great appointments this evening, and so we're excited to get started. And the first appointment is item A, the approval of the Webster principal. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Larissa Burke as principal at Webster Elementary School.
Support. We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of Webster principal. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This is one of my most favorite parts of the job when we bring new recommendations forward to you fine folks. So this evening, we are thrilled to be recommending Mrs. Larissa Burke to be the next principal at Webster Elementary. Larissa is no stranger to LPS, as she is a graduate of Stevenson High School, and now she and her husband are the proud parents of 4 future LPS grads who are here in the audience. So after, they're here, they're ready. Their principal's watching too, I might add. After dabbling in life as a Floridian, Larissa decided it was time to come back home, and her tenure in LPS began. She taught both kindergarten and 4th grade at Coolidge, and she served many schools as a literacy coach. And most recently, she has served the Rosedale community as both the behavior and academic EST, and done so with grace, and is a dynamic parking lot attendant, might I add. In addition to the daily 8 to 4 workday, Larissa also has served on various committees at both the school and district level, and she's held leadership roles within. So the traits that make Larissa so remarkable are ones that Dan Campbell would be proud of, and it is grit and perseverance. We have been watching Larissa for several years now, and she has strived to become a principal, and she has worked tirelessly to enhance her skill set during that time. She has learned so much from every leader whose path she has crossed, and she has willingly accepted feedback and embraced new learning as it came to her in every which way. Further, she looked to widen her knowledge base before the interview process even started, knowing Webster may be a possibility of where she may end up, and she started researching the essential elements, and she attended a conference on her own geared at teaching exceptional learners just so she could begin to dig into what makes Webster so exceptional. She's an advocate for all students and firmly believes that every student can be successful when we meet them where they are at. Further, she is going to work so hard on behalf of all the students, staff, and the Webster community so all may see the greatness within its 4 walls. Professionally, her preparation includes a bachelor's degree in math from the University of Michigan Dearborn and a master's in ed leadership from St. Leo University in Florida. So without further ado, I recommend Mrs. Larissa Burke to you all this evening.
Thank you. All right. We're going to go ahead and go with the vote, and then we'll talk about about how wonderful she is after. Any questions or comments from the board first? Anybody? Questions and comments from the board first? I'm just so excited. I'm sorry. Okay. We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of the Webster principal. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Congratulations. Come on up.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I just want to thank the board. I want to thank Ms. Oquist, and for the privilege of serving Webster Elementary as the new principal. I'm so excited to start this new journey with all of you, and I'm just so honored. Thank you very, very, very much. I want to thank the Webster staff and family who have already reached out with warm welcomes. And Webster is going to continue to grow to be a wonderful place, a school where students are excited to learn and teachers love to teach there, and families are just so proud to send their children to us. I want to thank my family. My husband had to step out with the youngest, but I'd like to thank my mom, my dad, my husband Steve for always being such a wonderful support to me. And my boys, Benjamin, Winston, Sawyer, and Isaac, you are my inspiration and my whole purpose for every action and every decision that I make. I love you all so much. Thank you. My LPS journey, like Mrs. Keats said, began back in 1988 as a kindergartner at Buchanan Elementary. And all of my memories throughout LPS have been just so positive. I grew to just love learning, and I grew to just feel so cared for by all of my teachers, and that's just what I continue to strive for my own children and for all of the children that we serve. My professional journey has just brought so many wonderful leaders, colleagues, staff, family, students into my life, and I've learned just so much from everyone. I want to thank Larry Griezak. Thank you so much for hiring me into Livonia all those years ago, but for also providing me so many rich opportunities and experiences that allowed me to be here today. So thank you, and for always being a consistent collaborator. So thank you, Larry. I'd like to thank Bill Green, Teresa O'Brien, thank you, for always believing in me and providing me, just caring enough about me and helping me get to those roles and opportunities that really helped, get me to reaching those goals and get me here today. So thank you so much. Jen Wilson, John Wenstrom, Paula Kohler, and Ben Hillard. Thank you so much. Working with you and under you as leaders, you've just given me so much great perspective, and your passion, your support, your encouragement is just so, I thank you. Thank you very much. And most of all, I want to thank my colleagues, my friends. I've enjoyed every moment. My Rosedale family, I'm going to miss you tremendously. But Webster Wildcats, I'm excited. I'm excited to learn with you. I'm excited to grow with you. I'm excited to face challenges with you. I'm excited to celebrate with you. So Webster Wildcats, let's do it.
Does anybody have any comments? Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you so much, President Bradford. So I think you're probably getting a feel for why we were so excited to recommend Larissa Burke to you as the principal of Webster Elementary. We wanted to make sure that we got it right, and she is absolutely the right person at the right time. She is a tremendous individual, and I think first and foremost, that's what we look for. At their core, who our leaders are as human beings. And I've often said who we elevate speaks volumes about what we believe and value as an organization. And I could not be more proud to have Mrs. Burke joining our administrative leadership team because of the person that she is, and she has demonstrated herself to be. She is all in for kids. She is all in for her colleagues. She is all in for her parents and the community. I am so excited to watch her leadership journey just soar. So we are thrilled to bring you on board, Larissa. We're thrilled to welcome your family to our administrative leadership team, and really excited to have you get started. That's tomorrow, right? Tomorrow. Okay. Have we told Ben that yet? Yes. He's closing his eyes and shaking his head. So we are thrilled, and congratulations to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that was so exciting. We have another one. So that's how wonderful it is tonight. Okay, so item 2 is item 2B. the approval of Riley Assistant Principal. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Joseph Shiivy as assistant principal at Riley Upper Elementary School.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of the Riley Assistant Principal. And again, this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Yes, again. So we have another great recommendation to bring forward to you. Mr. Joe Shiivy comes to us from South Lyon Community Schools, where he has served as a 3rd and 5th grade teacher for the last decade. While there, he crafted engaging and exciting lessons that provided enrichment and intervention opportunities to his students. With his innovative strategies, he was consistently beating the national and district averages in his standardized test outcomes. So that's something that definitely caught our attention. In addition to shaping the minds of 10-year-olds on a daily basis, he served on various committees and teams and acted as the interim administrator as well as the summer school special education administrator for the last 3 years. When meeting with Joe during the interview process, it was very clear he was an enthusiastic educator who strives to make relationships with his students and the entire school community. He spoke about being a culture leader in the school and how important it is for him to get to know Riley right away with the staff, the students, and the community members. He wants to continue to build that culture that Mr. Wenstrom has already established. Further, his interview highlighted his skill set for the use of technology in the classroom and a way to enhance school systems. So for us geriatric millennials, who it may not be our skill set anymore, he's going to come in and show us everything that he knows. His skills have led him to lead presentations at Oakland University on the use of technology and to gain valuable information from formative assessments in that matter. So aside from the data collection, he already matches Mr. Wenstrom's affinity for video making, as I believe the first video is going to drop tomorrow to the Riley community. So watch out. I mean, he's in the right seat on the bus on this one. So Joe is so eager to serve and work alongside John, and we think their energy and is a match, and their visions truly align for Riley. So his professional preparation began at Grand Valley University. He also studied mathematics like Mrs. Burke. He then earned his Ed Leadership degree from Oakland University. So in addition, and perhaps his most important role, he is a father. He and his wife have 2 adorable children who are here, a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old who are in attendance. So if he could even believe it, his life is about to get a little busier. So with that, I recommend Mr. Joe Shiivy to you all this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Any questions or comments from the board? Because we want to get right on with it. Okay, we've got a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of the Riley Assistant Principal. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion also carries. Congratulations. Come on up. Good evening.
Thank you. Whew, I've been watching too much Survivor, so I was waiting for some vote flipping or something. So I just want to start off by saying thank you to Superintendent Oquist, thank you to the board, and the entire interview process. Coming in new to Livonia, I've been in South Lyon for the past 10 years. It's been really interesting to get to realize all the connections that South Lyon and Livonia share. And I have a lot of people from South Lyon to thank. Sue Morris, the principal at Sayre Elementary, where I've spent the last 10 years, has provided me with a ton of different leadership opportunities. Amy Atwell is the coordinator of special education and put me in charge of that program. And then Brian Toth and Steve Archibald at Central Office have done just a tremendous job in really, helping me, light my fire for ed leadership, and I just could not be more excited. Ever since this started, this whole process with Riley, I have heard nothing but amazing things from Mr. Wenstrom. His reputation as a principal is just it's known far and wide. And the amount of people that have told me how lucky I am specifically to be with him at Riley, I could not be more excited. So I'm so excited to learn from him. I'm so excited to get to know all the staff, get to help the kids. And I would like to thank my family for being here as well. My wife's doing a great job keeping the 3-year-old quiet. I don't know how she's doing that. Our 4-year-old, it's about half hour past her bedtime. So thank you, Kylie, and as my parents as well. My dad was a graduate of Livonia, so it's a little bit of a homecoming for me as well. So yes, thank you so much for believing in me, believing in someone that's not directly from Livonia. I promise that I am going to do everything I possibly can to prove that you made the right decision here. Thank you.
Any comments or questions? Oh, I'm sure Mrs. Oquist.
Surprisingly, I have
Surprise,
a few.
surprise.
So we are absolutely thrilled to bring forward Mr. Shivy's name to you as assistant principal at Riley. We believe he absolutely is the leader for this time in this place. And one of the things that struck me, if I hope you don't mind me sharing from our interview, when we were talking about the importance of building relationships with our students and those connections we have with the children entrusted to us. Joe shared that he always felt that was really, really important as a teacher and has great relationships with his students. But he commented that once he became a father, he realized that every single one of the parents of the children at his school were sending us the people who mean the most in the world to them. And I have always felt that to be true as well as a leader, that every single child we have entrusted to us is somebody's entire world. And he said, that strikes me that that's 600 of the most important people in the world. And he talked about the importance of wanting to build and be part of a school community where that was valued, where that was acknowledged, and where you truly knew each child. And I don't know if there's a better place to start than that. And so I think that spoke volumes about him as an educator and at his core what is important. So that certainly impressed us, along with your skill set and many of the things Mrs. Keats mentioned. But we believe that relationships with our students and relationships with our staff are really at the heart and at the core of what we do. So that is a match for us. So congratulations, Joe.
Congratulations. So at this time, we're going to take a short, brief break to congratulate our honorees. So we'll be right back. Thank you. All righty, welcome back to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Livonia Public Schools for December 9th, 2024. We just did an approval for 2 new hires, a principal at Webster Elementary and a Riley assistant principal. So we're going to move on through our agenda now, and we're going on to item 2C, enrollment update. And it's been the Jen Keats show to this evening, so welcome, Jen Keats.
Thank
again.
you. It really has.
Yes, we're missing Phil Francis tonight.
Who's missing?
I am.
Ms. Thompson is going to help me out by putting a brief presentation, there it is, on cue, thank you, Emily, on the screen. I am delighted to share an enrollment update based on the fall 2024 count data with you all this evening. So I'm going to go through a couple different data points and just talk a little bit about how we predict our enrollment, as well as what factors go into that. So we'll go ahead, and I want to share this slide with you. So every year, and believe it or not, as the calendar year is getting ready to turn to January, we will begin with this whole process all over again. It's coming quite fast. So as we meet as a leadership team in cabinet with elementary, secondary, with our student service programs, we talk about all these different factors which impact enrollment, and they are listed here on this slide. Every year we look at our incoming kindergarten registrations. When that window opens up, March 1st now is when it opens. We look at our number of exiting seniors we have every year, and it varies year to year. Sometimes we have bigger classes than others. It's just one of the factors that goes into our predictions. Principal projections, and what this really means is principals have a beat on their schools, and they know if families intend to move. They know if somebody, just what the word on the street is, if there's going to be an influx of new housing developments coming in. They know kind of what to expect that way, as well as they typically send notifications out to their families that say, what are your intentions for next year? Are you coming back? Do you have any siblings, any kindergartners, know anybody in your neighborhood? That's kind of what's meant by that. Young Fives registrations, this is a real highlight for this year, as we have expanded our Young Fives program to 6 school sites, and that has really given us an uptick in registration for those Young Fives kiddos, and I'm going to talk more in depth about that in the next slides. Of course, we have our Schools of Choice window with our 105, 105C. The window for that is K-6. Previously, it did go to K-12, and we have limited that in recent years. We look at our selections for our ACAT and our MACAT students that are coming into the district as part of those programs at Webster and Frost, as well as Nigiero as one of our other magnet schools, and students who are coming into the programs over there as well. Incoming and outgoing students in our Act 18 programs, most are aware that we service students from neighboring districts who may belong to some of our county programs. We house a number of county programs that we are so fortunate to have here in LPS, and with that we welcome students from our surrounding districts into those programs. Share Time is another program that we offer in LPS, and what that means is we employ teachers that go to some of our private and parochial schools in the area, in specialty areas. They're not your typical K-6 classroom teachers nor core content areas, but rather classes like art, music, technology, STEM courses, and they will go to those schools and service students in those areas, and will typically get some FTEs from those private schools as well. In addition, we know our trends year over year in what to expect from data. Some of our schools, they are there March 1st when the kindergarten enrollment registration date opens. Others we know to wait till end of August, even September. Some are trickling in, and we know where those schools are, where the ebbs and flows are as well. And I referenced this briefly, but we notice what's around our community. It's been about 10 years ago now, where some of the parochials closed in the area, and that had a direct impact on our enrollment. In addition to what booms are happening in the neighborhoods, what new housing developments are going up, what might be turning into condos, just where an influx of families and students could be. So all of these pieces we take into account when we predict enrollment, as we wait for registrations to come in, as we wait for that count date to happen every October. So I'm cutting right to the chase here on the next slide, and it is a comparison of our fall 23 count to our fall 24 count. And when we look at this, we are thrilled to show that we are down 38, next slide please. We're down only 38.71 students compared from last year to this year at the exact same time. And there's a couple points of clarification here. The 0.71, certainly we're not down a partial child. When we count our students, they are counted in a term called FTE. And if we receive students that have special education services, sometimes it's a partial special education service. Or share time, we receive partial FTEs for those students we service in other schools. So it is truly not a half of a child or 3/4 of a child, it's just the equivalency we get for that particular child. And you see that the number is down 38, however, compare year over year, this 38 is quite significant, as it is the lowest number we have seen in all of the years that are represented on this chart here. So it is really a point of celebration that our enrollment is stabilizing. It is a message that we want to shout out to our community, that we have seen the lowest decrease in students since 2012, at least when this data was present up here. As we're looking at the year-over-year trend, we see numbers ranging from 38 for this year, upwards in the 500s during the COVID year. Now that was an anomaly. We saw a large decrease, but even in 2012, there were 464 students lost. We were seeing a trend that hovered around the 200s year after year. And for us to see only a 38 student loss is quite significant and can't be undervalued. It's a huge number, so we're quite proud of that. And that speaks to the programming in our schools, the messages out there, what we're offering students, meeting the needs of both students that may struggle or students that excel. We are finding ways to meet students where they're at in all grade levels. So the next slide is going to show you our year-over-year trend for our elementary students. And what is highlighted here is the change at each particular school, as well as the change in the triad and the overall elementary change. So the first thing that you may notice is there is an overwhelming number of green numbers represented here. In our Stevenson triad, we're up a total of 84.77 students. In our Churchill triad, that is 67.48. And the middle column there, our Franklin triad, is up 19.06 students. Our Nigiero and Webster populations are down a total of 40.5. But in grand total for elementary, we are up 130.81 students, which, again, I keep using the word significant, but at this point, it is quite significant that we have this much of an increase. I have put stars next to some of the elementary schools here that are listed. There is one error. Roosevelt should have a star there. These are our Young Fives sites. This year, we expanded our Young Fives program to hit 6 elementary school sites. We welcome families to these schools, and we are thrilled with this programming and the increased registration that we've seen. We have about 135 students, I believe, in our Young Fives program, which compared to last year, it was in the 60s. So that's a great increase of students that are receiving full-day Young Fives curriculum in our school sites to get acclimated to the day-to-day life in an elementary school. They're building relationships with their peers. They're building a relationship with the special area team and the support staff there, the principals, the secretaries. It's a way that we are welcoming our families earlier than ever before in our elementary sites, and that is directly related to the increase in numbers you see at these schools here. So we're super proud of that, and we're really excited to see what happens when that window opens again this spring. For our secondary enrollment changes, here we see a decrease in numbers at every school but Emerson, but it's not atypical. There's typically a fluctuation in our schools year over year. Again, it depends on the grade bands that are entering our 7-8 buildings in our middle schools. It also depends on the number of seniors we're graduating every year. So while we do see a decrease, these numbers are not alarming by any means. Since we last spoke at the at the study session, I was able to compile some more data with our special programs just to show the year-over-year change. With the addition of our ECC, some of our special programs have shifted buildings, and thus the data is not apples to apples from last year, Jackson to ECC. So it takes a little more digging from that perspective. But programs that remained intact were our LTP program, our Garfield Community School, and our Webster Rise. If you could move that slide over, please. So a total of 9 student increase across those programs. So a 10 student increase in our RISE program, 2.5 at Garfield, and a loss of 3.5 at the LTP program. So that goes hand in hand with the ins and outs of our Act 18 program that I spoke to. So while we are thrilled to share this data with you for our overall decrease of 38.71 FTEs in LPS for this year, there's a couple of remarkable factors that have to be noted about why we're seeing such a small decrease, and in spite of some other factors as well. So one of the big pieces to highlight is our Share Time program. So as I spoke to before, Share Time is when we send our teachers out to some of the parochial schools around in the area. So we were analyzing the benefit of all of the schools that we serviced and had to make a decision. Was it worthwhile for us to send teachers to as many of the schools as we were, especially when staff are harder to come by than they have been in 5, 10, 15 years ago? We had a number of substitutes as well as the Share Time staff that we employed. So we made the tough decision to service 8 less schools than we did in 2023. That resulted in a loss of 35.32 FTE. So when we consider we are down a total of 38.71 students, and last year we had a 35.32 FTE, that number shrinks even more, talking about our LPS students that we service and the limited Share Time students we service. So that's something that we will continue to monitor going into next year to see if that is consistent or what other effects that has. Further, our Young Fives increase cannot be talked about enough. This, as I said, is a really great addition to our elementary schools, where we are seeing our students when we want them, when they are the youngest, when we can intervene early, we can get them acclimated to their schools so they become a forever Raptor or they become a forever Bear. So we welcome them, and we will need to see what this year looks like. If children choose to stay here with their families, perhaps they seek other options, but we feel pretty confident in the programs that we have here that once they step foot in our doors, we'll keep them here. So this is something we'll continue to look at as we move to the new calendar year, and what will be in our enrollment considerations moving forward. So overall, just really, really excited about the stabilization of enrollment from the 23 to 24 school year, and it makes us really excited for what's to come in the future. This is something that we really want our community to know. We want our schools to celebrate it. We want our staff to celebrate it, because it's a point of pride, because we invest in LPS, and the investment is paying off with our families staying here.
Awesome, thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton?
Yeah, one thing I think is significant, I mean, Livonia Public Schools has educated approximately 1% of the children in the state of Michigan for going back at least a few decades. So when we're looking at our enrollment, a significant piece is the number of kindergartners who are coming in and the amount of seniors that are graduating out. I mean, those are two very, very significant numbers, and that's over, obviously, a 13-year span of your kindergarten to 12. So it's normal in a state, well, the entire country, not just the state of Michigan, is in a declining birth rate situation. But the birth rate, it has not completely stabilized, and yet our enrollment has. So what that's telling me is that we are picking up even more than the typical number of children that we have in the past in our community, which is for darn good reason, because we've got a superior educational program to offer to folks. I know one of the deciding factor that my husband and I made when we came into Livonia Public Schools, because we looked at public and private and a lot of different educational options, was the fact that Livonia Public Schools offers so many programs, from the complete academic range of needing extra supports to more of a general education to an advanced placement kind of a situation, and an enormous variety of extracurricular activities, starting out at a really young age and going all the way up through. So I'm very, very proud of the programming that we offer, and I'm super excited to see that our enrollment is stabilizing, because it just isn't stabilizing in very many school districts right now. It's continuing to decline because it matches birth rate. But when birth rate is continuing to decline and we're not, that says really fabulous things to me about our enrollment. So it's exciting. And thank you so much for giving us a lot of really granular detail, because these are the details that I know I like to take a look at, and it helps us get to the why, and helps us replicate the things that are going well, and helps us fix things that in areas that may not. But when we get granular data like this is really, really good stuff. But I'm thrilled, and I could not agree with you more. That 38 number is very significant, and something we've waited for a long time to see.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Anybody else? That was well said. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Bradford. Jen, you mentioned the programs that we have, but the programs alone won't bring the people in if you don't get the message out.
That's right.
So I think we've done a tremendous job in communicating to folks what programs we do have. That helps bring them in. If you don't have that message, doesn't matter how good your programs are, you're not going to bring the students in. So kudos to everybody who's able to get that message out and communicate the programs that we do have. It's just outstanding that they've been able to do that.
Agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any other questions or comments? We're excited. 38. That's a good number.
It's a good number.
We love it, and great information. Yes, thanks so much.
Thank you all.
We're moving on to item 3, the Building and Site Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. First item on our agenda this evening is item 3A, the playground structure for the Roosevelt ASD. And we'll be hearing from Brian Weber and Allison Smith.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. We're excited to bring this purchase to you tonight. As you know, we've discussed, we've been the fortunate recipients of some Act 18 grant dollars that were intended to improve our programs, look at program improvements. So we've been working closely together, myself with Megan, and talking with our folks in the building to find out what needs exist. And one of the needs that presented itself was the need for some additional playground equipment over at Roosevelt. And this project perfectly aligns with what the intent of these grant dollars are for. So the Roosevelt staff, along with Harry Lau, have worked with a playground designer to come up with a playscape that'll work perfectly for these children. And we've gotten the quote back for the cost of this. This will be purchased, if approved by the board, from Sourcewell Consortium, and the total cost, including equipment and labor, would be $203,592. And again, well within the grant limit. We have about $800,000 that we can spend on program improvements. We're talking about using some of those grant dollars to augment the budget that we'll be doing at Garfield when we get to the bond work there. But this also fits within the budget, so we think this would be a great use of those dollars.
Comments and questions on this item? Mrs. Smith, we talked about it in a little bit more depth at the study session. can you tell us, make sure the community is aware, this equipment is going to be specifically for our ASD or our autistic program for our kiddos?
That is
And the hows and whys that go with that.
Yep, exactly. And I will look to Ms. Sprout. I know she can speak to it even better than I can. But again, these are grant dollars intended to support our Act 18 students. And so we are planning to put a fence around the playground, and that helps with elopement of students. So I've killed enough time. Ms. Sprout is here.
That's great. So we have an existing play structure there right now that's in a fenced-in courtyard type area that helps support our students. It gives us a visual barrier as well as allows for some supervision of some of our youngest learners. Our Roosevelt ASD program starts at preschool. So we have kids as young as 3 accessing this playground equipment.
All right. So that is going to be fenced in, and this particular equipment will not be open to the public because it's got to be fenced in order to keep our kiddos safe. Because some of these kids, elopement meant something different until I was in an education world. Yes, but we're talking about sometimes kiddos may want to take off who are in that program, and this is a situation where we need to keep these kids safe. So we do have a smaller section of playground equipment. And that is fenced off. There's already brand new playground equipment that is for the general ed population and folks in our neighborhood and so forth that's at Roosevelt already.
Yes, and our students in our program for kids with autism have access to both play structures, so they may be on that larger play structure, but for some of our littlest learners, that is an overwhelming area, and elopement is a real thing, and yeah, you're right, it means something different in the education world, but as we're learning those routines and learning boundaries that are safe, it helps to have that fenced-in area so that our staff can help reinforce that safe behavior at school.
Okay, great.
And I'll add, because Mrs. Sproul mentioned that some of our little ones are as young as 3 years old, and there are different playground guidelines by the state, the LARA guidelines for students who are that age. And so they do require a fenced-in area, just like we had at least some of the area fenced in when we were at Jackson. As you know, at the new ECC, that area is fenced in. So there are different guidelines for the state when children are at the preschool age.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that the public was aware of that. So, all righty. Any other comments or questions on this item? Okay. And can this get put on the agenda for a vote at the next meeting?
Yes,
thank you. And thank you to both of you. The next item on our agenda is 3B, Summer 2024 Bond Contingency.
Perfect, thank you, and thank you to Brian for joining us.
Welcome back.
We would like to discuss with the board tonight, and I'll turn it over to Brian to go over the details. Using some of our unused general conditions and contingency from furniture and I believe from abatement, repurposing those bond funds to help with closing out our 2024 summer projects. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. Yeah, as mentioned, we are closing out the summer 24 renovations, and costs did surface to finalize some of the contractors out. It was a couple different scenarios of some work that was completed a few months back that didn't hit the appropriate plates and sign-off procedures. So working with Clark Construction for the next summer, we do have a kickoff meeting forthcoming that we will chat with the next summer's contractors to understand, just to get better at the timing and process and procedures that we can handle these in a more timely manner moving forward. So that was one portion of the work. The costs were vetted out by Clark Construction to make sure it was accurate costs and everything was vetted out in that scenario. It's just the matter did show up a little bit later than expected, and we will look to improve on that for next year. A couple other portions of this dollar, there's significant dollars. Approximately half of it are there's a couple items that came up with inspections, working with the state that we still want to question and make sure we're having all the information there before we do release those dollars. So we'll work with our engineering team to understand some of the items that were flagged late in the renovation process with some of the areas that we renovated in the bathroom specifically, that before we release those dollars to the contractor to make the improvements, that everybody understands what that renovation was and if those are truly necessary. So we'll keep everybody updated. The intent was to come to this meeting and ask for those dollars just in case we do need them. If they are unused, obviously they will be returned back to the owner contingency within the bond program. So we are coming with what we believe is a high water mark here, anything we can work back and get down. So in circling back to just an overall, we range usually between 6 and 10% of contingency that we ask for when we approach the board. This was on the lower end of the range at 7%. So the intent is we want to make sure that we're keeping a close eye and being good stewards of those dollars. If we can lower this amount with the initial ask, yes, I'm coming here and asking for a little bit more to be approved, but it's at the lower end, and make sure we do flag and warn people in a timely manner that we keep these costs down throughout the process. So, and as Ms. Smith did note, the work on page 2, it does give a breakout of some unused general conditions from a previous job. We had leftover contingency for the furniture purchase for the 24 renovations. We'll shift those dollars over. We had unused dollars for our move management, moving pieces and parts in and out of the buildings throughout the summer. There were savings there. And then lastly, with the abatement, we keep a pocket of money for each summer, and good news there is we did save money with the abatement in the scope that was necessary there, so we recover those dollars as well, whereas we're not taking an overall hit to the program. This is stuff that we're absorbing and making sure we move forward without impacts to future work.
So just to reiterate, we are still within the budget.
Yep.
And so this is really taking a look at contingency that remained from other 2024 projects and recommending that we put those dollars aside, have them approved by the board in the event that we do need to utilize them up to $150,000. So again, we are still within the overall budget. We have these contingency dollars, but we did want to bring that to you, and we will keep you updated with regard to a couple of the items, specifically the plumbing inspection with regard to the valves and whether or not that is a cost we need to incur. That would be probably the largest portion, singular portion
Correct.
of that contingency.
Correct.
All righty. Are there questions or comments on this item? No. All right. Seeing that, can we put this on the agenda for next week for the vote? The next item is 3C, the HVAC repair at Stevenson.
Perfect. And I'll start us off and then turn it over to Brian to explain the project. But this is a rather, I'll say, standard sinking fund repair that we would like to bring to you. It's for, as stated, the HVAC repair at Stevenson. The total cost for this repair would be $59,822.37. We solicited multiple quotes, heard back from 4 different vendors, and we were recommending that we go with SysTemp. They have done other work in our district, and we've had wonderful experience with them. They do thorough work, and we have the sinking funds available to cover the cost of this repair. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian to actually explain more of what exactly is going to be done over there.
So to get a little more technical with it, there are existing chiller systems, part of the cooling systems in the high schools that they were not on our, they've been on our radar, but they were not some of the systems that were replaced in this current bond program. It is something they are approaching the end of useful life, and this is something that will help extend that to when you have the opportunity to replace these systems in whole, which is an absolutely substantial and significant big program. But weighing the options with Mr. Roberts and the maintenance team, we had discussed options, and getting those replaced now would be a heavy lift, but understanding if these components that could be replaced get more years out of them, we can address this in a future capital program, so that this will be the necessary need, or a need to keep these systems moving forward until we can approach it in a larger capital program.
Comments or questions on this item? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Brian, I noticed that the lead time on this is 14 to 16 weeks. Is there any chance that we're going to need the repair before that, or?
Nope. So this is it's strictly a cooling system that it's affected by. So that's the intent of Mr. Roberts approaching it now to make sure that they can get swapped out before our next cooling season. So heating systems would not be affected by these pieces and parts.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
But it's a great question. It is why we brought it now and added it to the agenda as opposed to waiting until January,
Right.
because he did note that lead time. So we always appreciate when our team is diligent about taking a look at that. That would have certainly put us on a little different path if we had to wait until the end of January.
Any other comments or questions? No. All righty. We could put this one on the agenda also for next week's vote. And the last item under Building and Site is item 3D, additional funding for Holland bus purchase.
Perfect. Thank you so much. As you'll recall, we brought to the board a recommendation to purchase 6 buses back in September. We had solicited quotes through the MSBO bus purchasing program, and we went with Holland Bus Company. We were contacted by Holland Bus Company just a few weeks ago when they noted that they had made a mistake on their quote and were very apologetic. One of the buses, I can speak at least one of the buses, we do a modification to it because it's meant to handle wheelchairs. So it involves removing chairs so that we can fit wheelchairs onto the bus. And inadvertently, all the seats had been removed on the quote. So what we need is additional authorization, which is what we're coming to the board for, to purchase some of the chairs that we would need for that bus. So the cost for those chairs would be $5,352, bringing the total cost for that bus up to $171,185. And just wanted to share, again, the vendor was very apologetic. He felt, he was embarrassed for the oversight, but we felt very comfortable bringing this request to you because it was a pretty simple oversight and not a significant additional cost to us. So we do recommend that the board put this on the agenda for the regular meeting and that we get that additional authorization, and then we can go ahead and update the purchase order and get that over to the vendor.
Sounds good. Any comments or questions on this item? No. It's obviously a legitimate, fair cost, and we do have to have some seats on that bus.
Exactly, thank you.
All right, if we can put this on the agenda for next week. And that concludes Building and Site.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Weber,
Weber.
and thank you, Mrs. Smith, for sitting in for Mr. Francis, who couldn't be here this evening. We enjoyed you. Well, I mean, in the Mr. Francis role. All right, item 4, Finance Committee. Oh, isn't this lovely? I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Bonifield, and
Thank you,
I'm
President
sure you're going to
Bradford.
turn it over to Mrs. Smith.
Mrs. Smith. The first item we have is our summer tax resolution.
Perfect, thank you. This is something that we bring to the board every December, something that's prepared by Troon, our attorneys that help us with this. And it is a recommendation to continue our 50% levy of taxes in the winter and 50% levy of taxes in the summer. So with your authorization, we'll get that communication over to the city so they will know that we want to continue to levy the taxes that way. So this is not a change, but just a regular annual authorization.
Any questions?
No.
Are you guys okay if we put this on the consent agenda?
Yes, good idea.
For the next
Thank you.
meeting?
Great.
Okay.
I was just going to ask.
We'll do that. Okay, and Mrs. Smith, we have a little bit of a meatier item coming up, which is our 24-25 budget amendment.
Exactly, thank you so much. So during our study session, I had passed out our budget book that we're used to walking through, so I'm happy to walk through that with you tonight. In addition to the budget book, I also have a one-page summary that outlines specific adjustments that I'm proposing we make to our budget. As you'll notice, actually I should start, again, I know the board knows that, but for the community's sake, just a reminder that we adopt our budget back in June. That's required by law that we have it in place before July 1st, before we start the school year. And we know when we adopt that budget, we don't have all the information yet. So we have to do a lot of estimating. And obviously we're working very close with different folks to understand where the legislators are heading is in terms of their budget recommendations. So we do our best in June to come up with a budget for the year, but inevitably there's going to be some changes that come. So what you will see on this one-page summary, I thought we could start there and then we'll turn it over to the budget book. In our proposed budget for the 24-25 school year, I estimated that we would bring in revenue of about $175 million this school year. And we have a number of line items. They all fall under this category of MIPSERS funding that comes from the state. And that is what we'll be spending a lot of time on tonight because this accounts for the largest adjustments to our budget that I'm recommending for our first amendment. So the MIPSERS funding used to be 1 or 2 lines on our state aid report, and it's grown. This year we'll have 7 different categoricals that fall under that category, and each one is given to us for a specific purpose. So I'll walk us through what these are. So our first one is Section 147A1, and the intent of these funds is to assist with our current year retirement costs. And generally what I do is I start with what we received the prior year, and then I look at what the legislators have included in their budget. Are they keeping the budget flat? Are they keeping it, putting some money to it? Are they reducing it to come up with what an estimate is for the year? But ultimately, It is just an estimate because these monies are shared across the entire state, so it has to do with what our Livonia Public Schools portion of the overall payrolls across the state are. So I don't have that number, so I'm generally going off of the assumption that we're going to be consistent with what we were last year, i.e. if Livonia Public Schools made up 1% of the payrolls across the state of Michigan, I'm going to assume we're 1% for the next year. And it's when we get our first state aid report in October that I'll be able to see if there's been any shifts, and I can then make adjustments. So the first categorical, very small adjustment needed of $25,847 in revenue, so that would be less. So $25,000 less in revenue for that particular category. The next one is Section 147A2, and the purpose of that was to hold districts harmless from a state policy change related to the assumed rate of return on the pension. And this was a number of years back, and it probably sounds vaguely familiar, and I honestly can't tell you exactly what the percentage was, but if it was taking it from the assumed rate of 7% down to 6.5%, that increased the cost of retirement and funding the pension system, and so the state created this new categorical to help districts offset that additional retirement cost. So that's the second one. This particular one is paid out quarterly to us, so we received our first quarterly payment, and based on that quarterly payment and me multiplying it times 4 to get an estimate of what we'll be getting this year, it's $485,000 less than what we got last year. So I can only make the assumption that maybe our payroll as a percentage of the overall state is maybe a little bit lower this coming school year. Now the unfortunate thing about that particular one is that really is money that comes to us and really does help us offset our retirement costs, unlike other ones that are just in and out. This really was money that helped us offset retirement costs. So again, because that's paid quarterly, I'll keep a close eye on that to see if maybe the next quarter comes in a little higher, but I thought conservatively, let's estimate that we're going to get consistent payments throughout this school year. The next item is a new categorical. It's Section 147A4, and this was meant to reimburse 5.75% of our retirement costs. And the state, back when we were doing our proposed budget, was referring to this as a rate reduction. And so in our proposed budget, we knew that the legislators were talking about doing something to help with the retirement costs. And because they called it a rate reduction, I thought it would come to us in the form of an actual rate reduction. And I reduced our retirement costs on the expenditure side for that. Instead of actually reducing the rate, they are giving us revenue to help offset the retirement expenditures. So in this proposed budget, I'm adding in the revenue from that categorical, and then when we jumped on the expenditures, you'll see me having to add back in those retirement costs. And did I read what the dollar amount was? Just in case I didn't. That categorical for the general fund is $5,834,653. The next one, 3 more to go, the 147 different categoricals. The next one is 147C1. This is one of the ones that's just a flow through to ORS that the state gives us the money, but then we have to in turn cut a check right over to ORS every month. And one of the extra steps we have to do is we have to make sure that the expenditures match the revenue in that. One thing that complicates it, for actually the next two, I can jump to that. It's not necessarily the revenue in the general fund doesn't always equal the revenue, or I'm sorry, let me say that again. The revenue doesn't always equal the expenditures in the general fund because of how the accounting guidance came out. We allocate that expense across all of our funds. So grants, thinking Title I, IDA, they said it would be appropriate to charge that retirement cost there, but we don't have to then give the revenue to the grants. Same with like our food service fund, we record the expense there. So for that particular categorical, our 147C1 revenue is slightly higher than the expenditures that we have recorded in the general fund because we have the rest of the expenditures recorded in other funds. But in total, if you looked at all of our financials, if we receive $10 million of that, you'll see $10 million of retirement costs across our different funds. So that's a little confusing, but we've been doing it now for maybe 10 years, so it's ingrained in my brain. So. The other one, it acts just like it, just like 147C1. They've created a new 147C2, and that's, again, a flow from us to ORS. They give us the money, but then they send us an invoice, and we have to remit the money right over there. But we have to go through the trouble of recording those expenditures on our ledger. So I'm adjusting both the revenue and the expenditures in the general fund for that categorical. And then, second to last one, section 147E is a reduction of $149,000 for that categorical. And that categorical was meant to help offset increased employer contributions due to the 2017 MIPSERS reform. So that was when the state was making a push to move more towards like a 401k type plan where there was defined contributions from both the employee and the employer. So the employer matching employee contributions. They recognized that that was going to be an additional cost to districts. So they were giving us this categorical to try to help offset some of those increased retirement costs. So that number came in just a little bit lower. And then I didn't want to forget about this new categorical that we're still waiting for guidance on how it's going to flow, but section 147G is something that I anticipate will be a net zero impact on the district because it's meant to reimburse employees for their health insurance premiums that they're paying towards retiree health insurance. So right now, it's about 50% of our employees are in a retirement plan that includes retiree health insurance, and they contribute 3% of their paychecks into that fund, and then in turn, when they go to retire, they'll get health insurance through the state, and the state is doing a refund of that. To my knowledge, it's just for the year. I think there's actually, no, it is ongoing. Thank you. There's a lot of them to keep track of. So that one is ongoing. Initially, we were hopeful that we would see those funds this fall and be able to get those out to employees, but we have yet to see those funds come in our state aid, and we've yet to get some clear guidance on how we should handle that. There's a little bit of misunderstanding, I'll say, between the MDE and the state, the legislators. One party is saying that those 3% refunds are based on last year's payroll, while the other party thinks that it is, as the language is written, it's based on current year payrolls. And so they're trying to iron that out. I think MDE is looking for the legislators to clarify and have some clarifying language put out so that they know how to instruct districts to do that and also know how to get us those funds. So I've written it down here just so we can communicate about it, but again, I anticipate getting those funds, but then remitting those back to the employees. I'm not quite sure if we'll be setting that up in the funded projects fund or if that will be something that'll come to the general fund, but I wanted to put that on our radar, but it felt premature to include it in this budget amendment unless we get information in the next couple days. So.
I will mention that Mrs. Smith did a great job explaining what the challenge is right now. It's certainly something that our staff has heard about since the budget was passed by the state and something they're very much looking forward to if they have been paying into that. It is not that the state has decided to stop funding that, it is completely funded actually to the tune of about 140%. And so the anticipation is for the limited number of folks who are in that, it is a closed system. There are no new members going into that. So if you are paying into that now, there is funding for that group of individuals through retirement. We had initially anticipated getting this and starting that reimbursement process in September. Unfortunately, because of this disagreement that exists between the MDE and the legislature, we are hoping for something in the supplemental package that would potentially be passed in the next week and a half. They're in session for a couple of days over the next period of time until the winter recess, but they are looking at language to clarify whether or not it's this year's payroll deductions or last year. And they have set aside a specific dollar amount. And so there is some lack of clarity if that 3%, if it was based on this year's payroll, without knowing what every district's payroll increases would have been, whether or not that total amount will cover that. And so we believe it will be right around the number of 3%, but again, it wasn't that 3% is what was approved, it was a pot of money. But it is intended to be ongoing. And so we know our staff is anxious. We ask about it. I asked about it as recently as this afternoon in our Wayne County Superintendent legislative update. And we are hopeful that by February, districts will start receiving this in their monthly state aid payment. And then we are hopeful that RISA will have a system in place where we can run this through our payroll process to be able to reimburse this. So that is what we're planning for this year. And then it is locked into place as of October of 2025. So by that point in time, there should be a process for that. But we're looking at a reimbursement between now and that time. So it really is just a matter of the language toward the end was written, I believe, rather quickly. And so there's a bit of disagreement as to how to interpret that. So we are dogged about trying to get information, and Mrs. Smith and I will share that with our staff and all of you as soon as we have a final answer on it. But we know it is high on their priority list, and ours too.
Yeah, exactly. So those MIPSers, when you combine all of those, that is $6.9 million worth of additional revenue. When we jump down to the expenditures, though, we'll see that we've got some additional expenditures now that we have to record. So unfortunately, that's not just funds available for us to spend on our students. The next one I wanted to point out was other state categorical changes. The net amount, that's a number of line items, but they net to $142,562. So one thing that we had included in our proposed budget was an estimate of a $241 per pupil increase, and we know that that did not come to fruition. The state decided to do it differently, so this was the first time in a number of years that we saw a 0% increase in our foundation allowance. We did see funds, obviously, to support schools in other ways, like the retirement funds, but that's something that we need to adjust for. Thankfully, though, because our student enrollment is better than what we had anticipated, we had budgeted for a loss of 160 students, and we came in more favorably, so that helps us on the revenue side. Another item within there was Section 20F, Hold Harmless Guarantee. This was something that came back a number of years ago. I want to say it came about maybe in 2010, somewhere around that window. And it wasn't something that went to every district, but we were one of the lucky recipients to get those funds. And last year that was $800,000 for us. During our budget process, we knew that there was discussions of them cutting that by 50%, which would have been a $400,000 loss to us. When the pen actually got to the paper, that was completely repealed by the legislators. So that's an additional $400,000 that will not be coming our way this school year. So that's included in that net number. We saw an increase in what we anticipate will be our special education reimbursement based on our actual 23-24 costs. So we always get paid a year in the arrears. So that's included in this number as well. And then the last one of note for the revenue is good news. We've seen great interest rate earnings on our general fund cash balances in the neighborhood of about 5%. At one point it was almost 5.5%. So we've taken advantage of that, invested those funds with MyLaugh. So great returns and in a very safe product that we don't have to worry about losing any dollars on. For our proposed budget, I scaled that back, not knowing there's been lots of talks about what the interest market is going to do, so I scaled that back to $100,000 a month in projected interest earnings, and thankfully we're trending higher than that. So I think we'll probably bring in about $1.7 million this year in interest earnings on our general fund cash.
Isn't that amazing?
Excellent.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
fantastic. Yes.
When you look at 10, 12 years ago to now is unbelievable.
Yes.
Unbelievable. I mean, just amazing source of
Yes.
revenue. So
Yes.
thank you for taking care of
it's-
that.
Yeah, very easy to use too. If anybody, the MyLaugh fund, it's fantastic. So easy to invest the funds and easy to get it back to our checking account when we need to use the funds.
Fantastic.
So that's an additional $500,000 of revenue we'll be able to record in the general fund. So in total, I'm anticipating our general fund revenue to be just over $183 million for this coming school year. With that, I will run us through the major changes for our expenditures, and then we'll pop over to the budget book and see how that impacts us. So starting this school year off, again in June, we adopted a budget of just over $177 million. As shared, I had taken the rate reduction as it would be a reduction in our retirement costs, but it instead came to us as additional revenue. So I have built back in $5 million worth of retirement costs into the general fund. Also built in $2.4 million related to the 147C2 money that flows through us to ORS, and same with the next line item, $336,000 for 147C1. That's just flow through dollars. And then we had miscellaneous other adjustments, which that sounds crazy because I know $200,000 sounds like it is a lot of money, but when it's spread over 2,000 line items, it's not one in particular that stood out as a major thing worth noting. But that would bring our expenditures to just over $185 million for this school year. So what looks like big changes from our proposed budget really is 147 driven, from the state. It's those retirement funds that are a majority of the changes. And honestly, when you can see when we back those ones out, the revenue would only be changing by $142,000 and the expenditures by $204. So pretty minimal when you consider the size of our budget. So hopefully that was helpful. As we now jump into the budget book, you can see that plugged into our first page, which is our general fund revenues. So again, you'll see that $183 million. I've updated our beginning fund balance. So we started this school year off with just over $33 million. I'll point out on here you can see the largest, you can see federal and other financing sources stayed the same from the proposed budget, and we've got the change on the local side, which is our $500,000 worth of interest earnings, and then the state is the other, where you'll see the other change. And I'll keep on going. Please pause me if you have any questions. The next page is our general fund expenditures. And one thing that that isn't great about that 147C, I'm building in that $5 million, but you can see it kind of spread across all the different functions, so you kind of lose a little bit there. But with those expenditures of the $185 million, that puts us at an ending fund balance of 17%. And in comparison to where our proposed budget was, that was 17.1%. I do want to pause there and get your feedback. In October, when we were going over the update, I had anticipated additional funds, not remembering that I had already accounted for that retirement rate reduction in the form of expenditures. So when I saw it come through on the revenue side, I apologize. I honestly was not remembering that I had accounted for it on the expenditure side. So in October, we talked about bumping up our transfer to the capital projects fund because we had some one-time shifts of athletic costs and childcare costs to grants at the end of the school year. So I had talked about bumping that up to $1.5 million, and there I know was support from the board for that. I backed it off for now on this so that you could see what our ending fund balance would be if we kept it at the $500,000 that was included in our proposed budget. If we did want to continue with the $1.5 million, that would bring our ending fund balance to 16.4%. It's definitely, I don't think that we can go wrong with either direction. We have a number of capital projects that we would like to tackle, that we have been able to tackle. You can recall we've done we're in the process of doing the practice turf field over at Stevenson. We also brought to the board various other projects. I'm thinking of, gosh, I just blanked on what, it was another athletic-related project, but we've definitely got projects that are not currently built into our sinking fund program or to our bond program. So
We just did in the field house,
Thank you.
The additional
Thank you.
baseball area, and then the
volleyball?
replacement of
Yep.
and the replacement of the backboards and
Yep,
basketball.
exactly.
Mhm.
And we've talking about some other projects too with our athletic directors and with Mr. E2 about some sound systems that need to be updated. We'd like to get some numbers for that and bring that to the board. So there's definitely there's a number of projects we would like to tackle, but I didn't feel comfortable again putting that into this budget without getting your feedback of, is that something that you would like to see in our budget amendment? And again, knowing that would put our fund balance at about 16.4, or would you be more comfortable if our fund balance stayed consistent with what it looked to be during our proposed budget of 17%. So I will pause there and see if you'd like to think about it. We always have, additional time. This isn't the last time we'll be amending the budget, but I did want to pause there and give you some time to consider that.
President Bradford?
Is there anybody that has an issue with that? Yeah, no?
I
Oh, you're
thought
asking me?
you were
I'm actually,
Jones into-
I am okay with that. I think I would feel comfortable with that. I know the MASB recommends a fund balance of between 15 to 20%. But I think I think I would be okay with moving it and allowing those projects to go.
Sure. And I will, I generally wait till June to actually transfer funds over there, so that also gives us if something changes over the course of the next 6 months or throughout the rest of the school year, we could always revert back to another number too. We wouldn't plan to bring you any kind of plans that would spend those dollars before probably any time this school year.
If we agree tonight that we want to move the 1.5 million, is that going to change the timing if we don't do it on any upcoming projects that we wish to do?
It will not. As we'll see on the remaining pages, with the current slated projects we have in the works, we will have an ending fund balance in the capital projects fund of $2.5 million.
Okay.
We do have, and we'll get to that when we get to that page, we do need to, we're constantly looking at our bond program and projecting out what the remaining costs will be for the bond. And so we have been working with Plant Moran, realizing that to do everything to the degree that we'd like to do it, because we do things well, we do need to find some other sources of funds to round out the bond program. So we have been talking with them about using some of that fund balance in the capital projects fund. So what not transferring additional money would do to us would mean we'd probably have to pump the brakes on any additional projects at this point. We have enough funds to commit to the projects that are planned, but I would hold off on doing any other projects.
I know, I'm sorry, you had, Mrs. Oquist.
I would like to recommend perhaps somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
I think at this point in time, looking at the projects that we have on our plate, and we do have a planned expenditure of $3 million this year out of our capital projects fund, which would leave us about that $2.4 million if we stayed with the $500,000. I appreciate the willingness to go to 1.5. I just think we want to be cognizant of taking a look at that overall balance and where we will be. And I would like to recommend that we not move at this point in time any more than $1 million.
Okay.
So I think if we did that, that would give us some additional dollars to be able, we have absolutely projects
There's always
in
projects.
the wings and some
Right.
things we would really like to do. So I do think that additional $500,000 would be helpful. But I do think we want to be cognizant of keeping our fund balances as stable as possible as well. So my recommendation would be that we look at, instead of the 1.5 million, moving 1 million at this point in time. And again, we could then revisit it in March when we bring the budget update. And then, of course, the amendment again in June. So if that would be acceptable to you, that would be my recommendation at this time.
Okay. Mrs. Burton.
So we will be voting on that, Mrs. Oquist, next week then, on the moving of the 1
As
million.
part of the entire budget
Right,
amendment, yes.
Right, in the amendment. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. So, yes, it isn't just a tonight conversation. It would be part of the overall vote that we would be asking for next week.
Absolutely. And I don't think I spoke to us being able to move some expenditures one time over, the athletic expenditures and some childcare expenditures. I don't think I shared the dollar amount of that, though. So we were able to move $1 million worth of general fund expenditures over to our grants with the approval of MDE last year. So that's what prompted this conversation, was recognizing that we generally don't want to build our general fund budget on one-time revenues. So
Right.
recognizing we had a one-time revenue last year, which produced this ability to do a transfer. So
Gotcha.
just wanted to make sure we all knew that was a $1 million transfer of general fund expenditures to grants at the end of last year.
And
That prompted
I-
this conversation.
I do think we need to be watchful down the line in the years to come, because what if we have some type of, heaven forbid, some type of a problem, we might need those monies, and we don't want to dip too far below in that fund balance for sure. So I would also be comfortable with moving the 1 million, I think, and then if we can revisit it to make sure. But what does everybody else think? Miss
Colleen.
I'm
sorry.
more comfortable going with, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Colleen.
Mrs. Burton,
Sorry,
please
Tammy.
continue.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tammy.
I'm more comfortable going with the 1 million than the
Yeah.
whole 1.5 at this point.
Okay.
And again, especially knowing that we can move that additional 500,000 if it's appropriate later on in the school year.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Jarvis.
I also feel comfortable with moving 1 million. It will address our needs, and it also would be a little kinder to our fund balance in the long run. And again, it can be adjusted later if we need to, so.
Okay. Perfect. No. So I agree with the 1 million. I, specifically for the fact that we're offsetting the $1 million in one-time purchases and not moving additional monies. So it gives us that one-time match. It gets it out of the system, so we're not counting on that in the future, and also allows us to do some projects.
Absolutely.
So,
Perfect. I'll make that change then for
that will
our
go
regular
in.
meeting.
okay.
Sounds great.
And you'll have more for us on the budget?
I do.
Excellent.
The rest is not as exciting, but still worth going over with you. The next one that we look at is our funded projects fund, and we've got that little asterisk under there. Again, when we report these expenditures and revenues up to the state, they view this as part of our general fund, but for our tracking purposes, we split that out to a separate fund. So we've made just a few updates since June. One of them, a great thing, the LPS Education Foundation issued their grants again this year, and so we budgeted for that. But that's largely the change there. Moving on to our special education fund, I've updated our beginning fund balance on there, and then the only other change you'll see is under that facility improvements. That was the grant that we were just discussing that's going to be used to fund for the Roosevelt playground. So that's, we had assumed that we would be using more of those funds up last year, so we had included in our proposed budget about $100,000 of carryover, but we have about $800,000 of carryover for that, for those purposes. So that's reflected on the sheet.
Okay.
Moving on to our debt fund, the only very minimal updates, updated our tax revenue estimate, what we'll bring in through taxes, and updated the fund balance for debt retirement. So pretty boring there. Our next fund is our 2023 bond fund. The only update here is related to how much we ended up spending as of June 30th last year. We spent less, therefore our beginning fund balance is higher. And then I increased the expenditures to reflect that we do plan to use all of these funds up by June 30th. And that'll lead to the sale of our final series of the 2021 bond fund. I believe in January, where I'm working with PFM, our financial advisors, as well as our Troon attorneys to get a resolution to you in January to authorize us to sell that third series. Okay. So.
And on this,
Didn't see that seem like forever away?
Yes.
I mean, didn't
Yes.
it, when we
Yeah.
first went for the bond and then passed it in the first series, and it just, when we talked about the third series being in 2025, that it just seemed like so far away, and it's amazing to think that we are really closing in on our final schools of this bond project, and really just tremendous work that's been done. Very exciting.
Mrs. Smith, I know usually the budget for this series too, even though it's zero, there always seems to be a little bit of extra money that we haven't spent yet along the way, and we project to get to zero, and our actual takes us a while. Do we have sufficient time to be able to continue that process of whittling down to the actual zero with the bond, because there are timing requirements?
There are, yes, the 85% within 3 years, so we definitely have, we'll hit that target if we haven't already. but I'm going to do my darndest to try to get this money spent by June 30th, just so we can have clean books for next year. But we'll definitely know by our final amendment in June if we're on target to have that, or if we'll need to build in a little bit of funds to be expended the following school year.
Great.
Yep.
Questions?
No.
Anybody? Okay.
Perfect.
More?
Moving on to our sinking fund, the major update here is an update to the beginning fund balance, and everything else remains consistent. And then the change on the capital projects fund updated the beginning fund balance, and then you'll see a $1 million increase to the facility improvement. So started the school year off in their capital projects fund with just under $5 million. I anticipate it in here a $500,000 transfer from our general fund. $3 million is what we would need to cover all the projects kind of currently in the works, which again would leave us with just under $2.5 million in our capital projects fund. So that is the update on that page.
Okay.
Moving over to our food service fund, again, the only change in the food service fund is an update to our beginning fund balance. I'll be working with Plant Moran to identify some food service equipment that we purchased out of our bond, but would be an allowable use of our food service fund. So as I look at that fund balance of about $1.5 million, we definitely have fund balance that can cover some of the food service equipment. So we'll plan to use that fund balance up. Good.
Mrs. Smith, can you just remind us, the money in the food service fund must be used for food service purchases?
Correct.
We cannot put that back in the general fund or move it to capital projects?
That is correct. These are restricted funds, that any funds that we generate through the food service program need to be used for food service improvements.
Okay, and then when you say we did some bond purchases of food service equipment, what you're saying is that although that they were originally budgeted through the bond, we have food service money that's required to be used on that type of equipment that we can use to relieve some of our bond expenses, push those down through our food service fund, and then that will allow us to do some additional bond work or pick up where we may have some different costs due to escalating prices.
Perfect, Mrs. Bonifield. Yes, 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 yes.
We're going to miss you, Mrs.
Yes.
Bonifield.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great job. That's exactly it.
Exactly. We did kitchen renovations, and those kitchen renovations included new equipment such as ovens, and those are things that are on a pre-approved list that MDE has for uses of your fund balance, and so that definitely would be a good use
And
of those
beautiful
dollars.
kitchens. We did get to tour
Yeah.
those
We did.
kitchens.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And they're absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Smith, on to health and
Yep.
welfare.
On to health and welfare. The only update here, again, is an update to our beginning fund balance. So that's been adjusted. And then moving on to our very last page, our last two funds. Again, the only changes on these two funds is the adjustment to their beginning fund balance. So updated the scholarship fund. We started this school year off with just over $42,000, and in our activity funds, just under $1.8 million. So that is our budget amendment at this time. Again, with your permission, we'd like to put this on the agenda for the next regular meeting for a vote. I've made note that we would like to adjust on the general fund expenditures, move that to a $1 million transfer. So I'll make that note and get that included in your packet for the meeting. And happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any
Mrs.
questions?
Smith?
Mrs. Oakwith.
Mrs. Smith, would it make sense, since we're putting those additional dollars in order to get to some additional projects, that we would also increase then the facility improvements expenditures to 3.5?
Absolutely.
Since we're putting in the
Makes sense.
additional
Yep.
500,000? Okay, great,
Is
thank
everybody
you.
comfortable with that? Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
And then just, how much of a presentation are you going to give us next week? Just so if people wanted to tune in.
Yeah, generally during the regular meetings, I really focus on our general fund. And then if anybody was interested in the details of the funds, I'd refer them back to our committee meeting. So we'll probably next week just focus on the general fund unless you'd like me to do anything differently.
Okay.
That'd be fine.
Great.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
And-
Mrs. Burton.
Just one compliment to you, Mrs. Smith. I had occasion to talk with some folks who have experience in other districts over the weekend, and we do not take for granted for a moment the skill at which you keep our books in such phenomenal condition. Not every district is blessed to have an individual of your caliber, and it is so very appreciated. sometimes they're small things, sometimes they are major things that go awry in other districts, and we just simply don't have that here. But I don't want you for a moment to think that we take that for granted or that we don't appreciate exactly how wonderful your services are for this district. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will say back, I feel like I hear from my colleagues in my position in other places too, that they don't have the relationship that I have with the board. And I appreciate the trust that you put into me, and I never want to take that for granted. So I will be as transparent as possible. I hope you always feel that way, and I hope you know if you ever have questions, I'm always happy to answer them. So thank you for the trust that you put into me. It's definitely an honor to serve our community, and I love what I do. Love what I do.
Yeah, nice work.
Thank you. Anything else for Mrs. Smith? And that will conclude finance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Bonifield. Wonderful job. We're going to move on to item 5, the curriculum committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
And this evening, we're coming to you with item 5A, the seal of biliteracy, and we have Mr. Itu and Mrs. O'Brien presenting for us.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. And we are presenting on the seal of biliteracy. This is a recognition opportunity for our multilingual learners who earn a high school diploma. It's something that the state of Michigan adopted about six years ago. And a student who has the opportunity to earn this or does earn it receives an embossed or a stamped seal of biliteracy on their high school diploma for that recognition that they can use for resumes or job hunting, things of that nature. So the seal of biliteracy is for students who are proficient in English or an additional language, another language. How they earn the proficiency in English is by completing their MMC requirements per the state of Michigan and earning their high school diploma. How they earn proficiency in the other language that they speak, whichever language that is, they have to take a test. There's a multitude of tests based on the language that you are learning to earn proficiency, and you have to earn an intermediate high level of proficiency on that exam to become a multilingual learner and earn the seal of biliteracy. Multiple school districts throughout the state of Michigan, I think about 115 at this point, have adopted the seal of biliteracy. We're looking to do the same as well. It's not something that has to be board approved, so it's more sharing with you that discussion piece and what we're looking to do for beginning this school year. Anything else?
This recommendation was brought to us by our
Thank
World
you.
Language Content Area Leader, Mr. Miga, and his committee. And they wrote up a long proposal and invested a lot of time digging into what it would take for our district to move in this direction. And Mr. Itu and I support this decision of offering this to our multilingual learners.
Thank you. Mrs. O'Quist.
Could you share a little bit about how we will notify students and their parents that this is an opportunity? Will it start this year, or would it start the following year? How would they learn about this and know what the requirements are in order to achieve this? So I think our plan would be to work with our world language teachers, led by Mr. Miga, if we are ready to move forward with that, what that would look like for our parents. So the assessment is given usually in the spring of the junior year or the fall of the senior year. So if we were offering it to this year's juniors, we would need to get our teachers communicating with their parents on that, what it would take. So they would need to, be prepared that they need to pass their MMC and be prepared for the English part at the end of the year. But then also we would need to arrange for them to take the test in the language that they are currently taking or have a ability in to pass that test. So we would have to put that process into place.
Mrs. Burton, I know you had your hand raised earlier.
Take a couple here first.
Okay. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. Would students only be eligible to do this for languages that are currently offered through Livonia Public Schools, or could it be any language that they are proficient in, regardless of whether we offer it or not?
At this point, it's any language. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Knowing that we have a growing population of EL learners, English language learners, yep, we absolutely would welcome that.
Mrs. President Bradford.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Could you speak to the cost of this a little bit? I'm just reading it now, but is there a significant cost to the district, or does the cost go on to the student and family?
Typically, the exams are anywhere from $25 to $95, I believe.
Yep.
I'm eyeballing that a little bit from here.
Yep.
At this point in time, it's something that the district would support the families in doing. in
So
taking
we
those
would
tests.
provide that if
Correct.
they want to?
Correct.
If they want to take the test?
Correct.
Okay.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
So do we have a rough estimate on how many kids we think are going to achieve this, just as a kind of a, no?
It's hard to estimate that. I do know, speaking with Mr. Miga, our content area leader, he says that those tests, those exams are difficult, especially to earn that intermediate high level of proficiency. But to predict or give an estimate would be tough.
And so this is kind of a weird question, but logistically, how does that, do they give us are we actually gonna rubber stamp it, or they give us one of the paper crimpers and it's up to us? Because I know usually, we get all of those, we get a stack of, and
Diplomas.
somebody's gonna have to sort through all the diplomas, and I know it's a weird question, but logistically, how does the stamp get on the?
It's either way. So logistically, we still have to work through that, but either the district will provide that and we'll get that stamp through the organization, or the family can actually go online and receive the stamp and do it themselves.
Oh, so maybe
But that's something we still need to talk through
a
and work
gold
through.
seal or
Correct.
something. Okay, I was just curious how.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to recognize Mr. Miga for looking outside of the box and helping us to enhance programs and student opportunities. I love it when our staff is eager to improve what we already offer our students and make a better learning experience. So kudos to Mr. Miga.
Thank you. Mrs. Burton.
Yes, kind of circling back to the level of proficiency needed for this test. Is this something, it sounds to me like students who speak another language other than English could and possibly should take advantage of something like this, because by virtue of the fact that they've grown up with another language, they're likely to be proficient or highly proficient and be able to earn this seal
Absolutely.
with their natural upbringing.
Correct.
How realistic is it for our students who may have taken, say, a level 3 or 4 or 5 in a language? Is it targeted at those students also, or is it really just targeted at students whose English is a second language for them?
No, it's targeted for both students.
Yes.
And Mr. Miga referenced, I believe, and I may be misspeaking, and I'll confirm with him tomorrow, that really it's your level 3 and above students that are learning within our programs, the French, the Japanese, the Spanish, whatever it might be, or so on and so forth, in German, right? Yeah, so level 3 and higher.
Okay. It sounds to me like it would take a significant level of language immersion to be able to really score highly enough to earn this, as it should, frankly, because this is a significant recognition. And then this is something that is tangentially related, but I'd like you to just update us on a future meeting, if you would. We talked about Mrs. Bonfield and I were in some classes about this a year or two ago, about the fact that the foreign language requirement is not necessarily a requirement of how long you sat in a seat in our classroom, but rather, can you pass the test? And for students who English is their second language, they speak another language at home, they can naturally pass those tests because they have they know what we will be teaching them. And what State of Michigan was saying is that they don't necessarily need to sit in a Spanish class for a semester in order to earn that credit if Spanish is the language that they speak at home. If they can come in and take and pass the test, then that not just waives that requirement, but it either
gives them
waives
credit.
the requirement or it gives them the credit for having taken the class. So therefore, it would free them up to take a different class that would be more beneficial for the student. I know we talked about this as a board with some of our cabinet members, and I'm not asking you to answer on it tonight because it wasn't the topic tonight, but coming up in another future board meeting, can you bring us up to speed with where we are in Livonia Public Schools as far as offering that? Because I know it's not just flipping a switch. It takes some work.
Flexibility.
Yeah.
Yep, that was the presentation. I saw it last year also.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes, we will add that to a future study session.
Okay, thank you.
Is this program only for high school students? Or is this something that maybe we could offer, for example, at Niji Euro, for sixth graders?
At this point in time, it's for high school students who earn a high school diploma.
Because they still have to meet the Michigan Merit
Merit,
curriculum
correct.
and pass that. And so it
So it
starts
wouldn't
at the
carry
end of junior
forward.
year for this, correct?
Yeah,
Begins their, yep.
They can test in spring of their junior year or fall of their senior year.
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So as, you know, we celebrate all the opportunities that our students have to add additional credentials, and this is another fantastic way that isn't just at the Career Tech Center, but right within the general ed program, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes the curriculum committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. All right, we're going to move on to item 6, the policy committee. Mrs. Frank had to leave us a little early this evening, and I do not believe we have anything on policy.
We do not, I'm sorry.
That's all right, no problem. Item 7, personnel committee. Mr. Johnson.
I don't believe we have anything this evening.
We do not.
And item 8, the legislative committee. Mrs. Jarvis.
You don't believe we have anything on our agenda, Mrs. Oquist?
We do not. We are watching Lame Duck.
Absolutely.
So they are scheduled to be in session, I believe, another day or two this week, and then possibly a couple of days next week. So I did meet with colleagues today to get an update. So there are a few things we're watching closely on the horizon for Lame Duck, and we always hope that there's caution before acting, especially when we're working in a short period of time. So I will be reaching out to our local legislators on a couple of items that are in front of, potentially in front of the legislature at this time.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I think we are at the end of our meeting this evening. I hope everybody has a nice evening. Good night.